I'm Mark Dresner, and this is Forward Focus, a special interview series featuring experts and leaders at the forefront of innovation. Forward Focus is brought to you by FEI, the Front End of Innovation Conference, now approaching its 12th year. Joining us today is Navi Raju. He is a Silicon Valley-based strategy consultant and the co-author of Jugaad Innovation and From Smart to Wise. Navi, welcome to Forward Focus.
Glad to be here.
Delight to have you. I want to talk about something that that has been really lighting a fire in the innovation circles lately. I don't know that I would call it a new trend, but it's certainly one that a lot of people are talking about and not entirely familiar with, and that is frugal innovation. Tell us a little bit about frugal innovation and how did it come about?
So frugal innovation is essentially the ability to do more with less, in a nutshell. Mm-hmm. It's a concept that is practiced by many entrepreneurs, actually I would say thousands of entrepreneurs and innovative companies in emerging markets like India, mm-hmm. China, or Brazil, where they don't have too many resources, right? So there's a resource scarcity that forces them to think really creatively on how can we deliver more value to customers by using very limited resources they possess. Mm-hmm. And lately what we've discovered is that this concept has led to some amazing solutions, whether it's mobile banking in Africa that allows people to send, receive money using their mobile phones mm-hmm. without having a banking account, for example. Right. Or you heard about the $2,000 car, the Nano, in right. India, for example. Mm-hmm. And similarly in China, you see a lot of innovation in healthcare where people are finding ways to deliver healthcare in a very affordable way for people by leveraging medical devices that cost a fraction of what we sell in this country, for mm-hmm. example. Mm-hmm. So the frugal innovation is something that is being practiced extensively by entrepreneurs and innovators in emerging markets. But the new trend is that this concept is gaining traction in the Western economies as well, whether it's in US or in Europe as well. And the reason is because we are undergoing massive economic, kind of recession, mm-hmm. in the West. To give you some indicators, it's very interesting, like the average American family lost nearly 40% of its wealth between 2007 and 2010, for example. Mm-hmm. So clearly, the consumers in the West are becoming more frugal as well. Mm-hmm. So suddenly, all the frugal solutions that we are seeing happening in emerging markets are finding relevance here as well. But it's not just about taking a product from emerging market and bring it here. It's more about how can we practice frugal innovation right here in the United States mm-hmm. so that we can begin to create and market solutions that are delivering more value for less cost, whether you're developing them in US or Europe. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to go all the way to India or Brazil to develop these solutions. Yeah.
Do you have a sense that there is some urgency to adopt frugal innovation approaches in developed or westernized markets?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just pick two sectors, right? You pick a healthcare sector in this country, right? I mean, at the rate where it's going, we are heading for a train wreck, yes. right? I mean, clearly, unless we rein in the escalating healthcare cost, mm-hmm. we are going to have a big problem very soon. So healthcare industry is actually reforming itself and trying to be frugal. For example, you see a lot of healthcare providers like Kaiser Permanente mm-hmm. who are actually running their own internal think tanks or R&D teams to figure out how can they reduce the cost of delivery of healthcare. You see the same thing in education sector, which is another sector which is heading for major disruption. Right. You have things like the Khan Academy mm-hmm. Run by Sal Khan, who actually offers online tutorials on YouTube for free, fundamentally disrupting the way education content can right. be offered. So I think a lot of sectors like education, healthcare, financial services that have become quite bloated mm-hmm. in a way in the US and in Europe are, I think, prime sectors for disruption by innovators that can come up with solutions that deliver more value at less cost.
And you're seeing even, since you mentioned healthcare, competitors, fierce competitors, mm-hmm. The major global pharmaceutical
Absolutely.
companies now
yes.
forming R&D consortia, pre-competitive,
yes.
of course,
yes. Absolutely.
just to save costs and
yes.
also to share to expedite the R&D process.
That's
at
correct.
least initially.
That's
so
right.
it really
I mean,
is
you're right because
fascinating.
healthcare you're right because if you look at it, what's happening is that the generic drug companies,
mm-hmm.
many of them are from Brazil, South Africa or India, for example,
Right.
they are going to come in this country. And the reason is because with Obamacare, the reform, more people need to be, made accessible. The drugs have to be made more accessible to more people in America. And this is going to create amazing price pressure on the large big pharma companies because they're going to face competition on one hand from the politicians. They're going to face pressure from the healthcare insurers, and then they're going to face pressure from the generic drug companies as well, and then finally from the consumers as well. So I see like a perfect storm brewing right now in this country in sectors like healthcare and education and consumer goods and whatnot. So,
where is the concept? This is a little bit redundant, but where is it currently being best applied in developed and Western markets? Are there particular industries that are really doing this well right now?
I would say let's pick a few companies. I think that would be a nice way to illustrate how this concept works.
Sure.
I mean, the three companies are interestingly from three kind of different industries. You see, for example, Unilever, which is a large consumer goods giant, and they actually have a mandate to double the revenues by 2020 while reducing the environmental impact by the same 50%, right, in the same time frame. So in order to do more with less, their CEO, Paul Polman, has embarked on a massive frugal innovation agenda, which consists in systematically reevaluating every product in the portfolio to make it more, resource, economical, so that, for example, soaps can be using less water and clean better, for example. And in countries like Spain and Greece, they're also selling their products like whether it's mayonnaise or laundry detergents in small packages as opposed to big boxes. Again, a practice inspired by emerging markets. So that's one company. So consumer goods clearly is going to be a prime sector. Procter & Gamble and Unilever are going to be in a way kind of forced to drive this. Then if you look at automotive sector, because of the competition from these low-cost countries, Renault Nissan, which is a large European and Japanese car maker, is an alliance between Renault and Nissan. Their CEO, Carlos Ghosn, who in a way coined this concept of frugal innovation back in 2006, actually. That company is now embarking a major initiative which is focused on creating these ultra low-cost cars. And a lot of initiatives are being driven from India, but with input from French engineers and Japanese engineers as well. So this is a great initiative for the car industry, which I think, frankly, is heading for a major disruption as well. And then the third company is Siemens, large industrial conglomerate, German company. They also have a major initiative called SMART, which is essentially a set of products that are going to be simple, maintenance-friendly, affordable, reliable, and timely to market. And this is something they estimate could be nearly a $200 billion market right now.
That's quite an impressive number given the stage of maturity or lack
That's
thereof.
correct. That's right. And that's why I'm saying is that frugal innovation is not something which is futuristic. It's happening right now in real time. And that's why we are having this conversation, because I think it's important for the viewers to realize that this is not something that they can experiment and try out for a couple of years and then mainstream it. This is a concept that is already being implemented right now successfully by companies like Unilever, Siemens, and Renault Nissan. And if you are playing in these industries and if you don't already practice this concept, you're going to fall behind the curve because this is something which is happening in such a kind of very discreet, below the radar kind of fashion. And I suspect that the tipping point, so to speak, is going to come very soon, whereby a large segment of industries in every industry is going to jump into this very soon. So that's why I'm hoping is that the people watching us will realize that there's a sense of urgency to adopt it. Because the competitors are doing it, the customers are going to want it, and then sometimes the regulators, the government, are going to push them to it, like in the healthcare sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings me to an interesting question, and that is, I'm a CEO or I'm a senior level manager, perhaps an innovation director at a global level, and I have suddenly got frugal innovation on my radar. What 3 steps do I need to consider or take in order to really get the ball rolling here?
Absolutely. So a couple of concrete steps that these leaders can take. One is frugal innovation only happens when you have enough constraints, because frugal innovation is about dealing with constraints and doing more with less in a very adverse circumstances. So one of my kind of recommendation lately is that you need to create what I call artificial constraints, because if you have too many resources at play, people become complacent. There is no kind of sense of urgency, to do more with less. So you need to think about, how do you create artificial constraints? So for example, Renault-Nissan, what they are saying is that, look, if you want to build a low-cost cars, we cannot give you the same budget, R&D budget like before. So we're going to cut our budget significantly. We are going to put a lot more pressure on you to produce faster, better, cheaper. And guess what? It actually acts as magic, because suddenly the innovation team is very much interested now to surpass themselves and come up with solutions that are very frugal, because the inputs have been drastically reduced, right? So they have pressure to use fewer inputs and still create more output. So I think creating these artificial constraints is one thing that companies can do. The second thing I would say is that remember that frugal innovation is something that has to add value to the customer. So I think a lot of companies that I've observed, they make the mistake of doing frugal innovation in terms of saving cost or improving business processes, performance kind of thing. These are all great stuff, but the customer doesn't see the value out of that.
Right.
So it's important to take a customer-centric view. That means you have to look at what customers really need, not what they desire or what they want. And then based on the assessment of the exact requirements, you can create a solution that is frugal. Because why that's frugal? Because you don't waste time cramming a lot of features. You only create a solution with the minimum set of requirements or features that meet the requirements. So taking this customer-centric view, I think, is the second thing that helps the frugal innovation. And the third thing I would say is that frugal innovation is something that can be applied to anything. It could be a product, it could be a service, it could be a business process, but ultimately it's about a mindset. So it's important that companies don't focus on just creating a frugal product like a low-cost medical device or an affordable car or something like that, because by fluke or with some with diligent efforts, you may be lucky to come up with such a product. But the question is, how do you create an engine that can systematically produce these frugal solutions? That requires a frugal mindset, something where the culture within the company is kind of imparted and ingrained with this frugal mindset. And that starts with leadership. You need to have leaders who walk the walk. And at Renault-Nissan, what they have done is they have put in charge of the frugal innovation initiatives somebody named Gérard de Tourbe, who actually has demonstrated his ability to produce these affordable solutions in a European context. And now he's being tasked to take it to the next level out of India to create these even more affordable solutions. So this person, in a way, has this kind of very interesting, flexible mindset that allows him to unlearn all the best practices learned developing these high-end cars and say, you know what, I'm starting as a student. I need to learn everything from zero again. So a sense of humility is very important if you want to succeed with frugal innovation.
Right. And would you agree that there is definitely a distinction that needs to be made between cheap and frugal? Because I think what people are the tendency, especially when you're going through a financial crisis, as we have been, is to think about it from you kind of alluded to this, not a cheap product, but an effective product that can be made efficiently and at a low cost.
Absolutely,
whatever that is.
You hit the nail on his head. So that's a very important question, Mark. I think about it, right? There's a kind of a wrong perception that the term frugal means two things. First of all, it means cheap, shoddy products, right?
Right.
And that's not true, because in a moment I will explain why. And the other perception also is that there's a sense that frugal means that you're depriving me as a consumer, right? There's a sense of sacrifice. And that's why I say the definition of frugal innovation is about how do you deliver more value at less cost. So it's not just about saving a buck or two, right? That is like called value engineering as a old concept. But now we are talking about creating more value. So as a consumer, not only I feel I'm saving money, but actually I'm getting more value. That is why it's important, right? And that's why the term frugal innovation is like an oxymoron almost.
Yes.
It's difficult.
Yes.
Now, that's why what I was saying is that coming back to the quality aspect. So if you think about frugal innovation, the frugal solutions in a way have to hit on a few dimensions, right? It has to be affordable. The affordability is important. The other dimension is that it has to be accessible. People can easily access those solutions. And the third one is it has to be sustainable from environmental perspective and from a social perspective. And then fourthly, it has to be high quality. And that's why what Renault, Nissan, Siemens, and Unilever are trying to say is that, look, we have amazing brands. These brands, consumers equate with quality. So if we do frugal innovation, we are not going to come up with, poor quality products.
They can't compromise the brand.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have to put our brand on it, and that's what is going to convince customers that even though these are relatively affordable solutions, low-cost solutions, they are not cheap products, shoddy products of poor quality, but actually these are high-quality products backed by a very respected brand. This is where I do think that multinationals and and branded companies like Unilever and others have an amazing shot at becoming pioneers of frugal innovation because they can produce solutions that are not only affordable but also of high quality. So what we are talking about is that if you can combine the kind of brand management capabilities of the West, because the West is very powerful in branding and positioning, right?
Right.
If you combine that with the frugal innovation capabilities of the emerging markets, then the integration of these two capabilities will yield some unbelievable products that will be not only affordable but highest quality. And that's why I think that the multinationals have a very good shot at driving this frugal innovation revolution.
And you touched on this, and I just want to make sure that we've covered it. What do you think when adopting frugal innovation? What are the most common mistakes that companies are making sort of out of the gate? Granted, it's early on.
Yes.
And do you have any tips for avoiding them?
Yeah, I think one of the common mistakes, if I look at people do, is they say, okay, I have a product that sells for $100. How can I come up with a version that is, maybe $20, right? Because that is something that is exciting as a, intellectual exercise to say, can we create a frugal solution that costs a fraction of what you sell currently? The problem with that is manifold. One is that your sales and marketing team will not have an interest in selling a product that is 10 times cheaper because that's going to cannibalize your existing offerings. Right? And secondly, for engineers, they have to unlearn a lot of existing approaches to innovation to go from a $100 product to a $20 product, right? So what I've seen is that my recommendation is therefore is learn to crawl and walk before you can run in the frugal innovation track, so to speak. So the way you do that is maybe you start with hey, can I create a product that is 25% cheaper first, right? Try it out, learn how it works, learn new skills, and then you can gradually try to make it more affordable.
Pare it back as
you go. Exactly. Renault Nissan, that's what they did. They started with the first project, frugal innovation project, consisted in creating a 5,000 euro car called the Logan. And the idea was that car will be costing 50% of the current average price of the cars. Now they are saying is that, okay, after about 8 years, we learned how to do it. And now, can we tackle the next challenge? Let's push the frontier of frugal innovation by coming up with a car that is 50% even cheaper. Right?
Yeah, right.
So they're taking this very kind of gradual approach, to learning how to do frugal innovation. And that allows the R&D team and the rest of the organization to get more acquainted with this, new techniques and new mindset in a gradual fashion. Therefore, the culture of frugal innovation takes time to build in the organization. So my recommendation is that don't rush it. My research shows that on average it takes about between 7 to 10 years for a company to acquire, this kind of frugal mindset. So it's important to start small as a proof of concept, try it out, validate it, get some credibility and legitimacy, and then scale it up.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is, first of all, you're talking about unlearning what everyone has learned. I mean, really, it is a massive mindset change. The other issue is that the challenge bar has been raised significantly because, as you pointed out, you're looking to improve value and decrease costs. So that's quite a puzzle, and I think a lot of people have a lot of fun and frustration at the same time working with that.
That's a good point. That's a good point, right? A couple of observations there. You hit some very important points there, Mark, is that it is kind of challenging, but guess what? What I find is that especially R&D teams, they love challenges.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, right, because after all, frugal innovation is what? It's about creating new level of complexity in how you develop products. What I mean by that is the equation, because it comes down to set of equations you have to solve, right? That's what product development is about.
Right.
You're just saying that we are going to add more variables or more elements in the equation you have to solve now, right? So that's why it's about more value for less cost. So you're making the equation a bit more complex to solve, but it's still an equation.
Yes.
So engineers and scientists, they love problem solving, right? So if you can reframe frugal innovation as essentially an exciting intellectual challenge,
yes,
then suddenly I've seen that in many companies, then the R&D teams get fired up. But if you position this as something which is radically new, it's something this is like something disruptive kind of thing, then culturally there is a kind of pushback, there's a resistance. So I think the clever way a wise way to get people fired up about frugal innovation is saying that this is just about innovating under constraints, and we've done that in the past, and it's about solving problems. Again, something we've done in the past. It's just that these are going to be a bit more complex problems than we've dealt in the past. So there's a sense of familiarity that you have to build upon in a way. And I've seen that companies like Renault Nissan, who have done that very well by kind of creating challenges among R&D teams. So they pit, for example, an R&D team from France, India, and Japan to see who can come up with the most affordable product. So this kind of healthy rivalry, R&D teams love that.
Yeah.
They thrive on it.
Yeah.
So there are some interesting techniques you can use to make frugal innovation be adopted in a non-threatening way. That's how I'm saying.
And as it matures, I'm sure we'll hear more about it, but one thing I wanted to do is mention to our audience that this year you've released a new book, From Smart to Wise, right? And it's gained quite a bit of popularity from what I understand very quickly, so there's clearly a lot of interest in this space.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the book so the second book, From Smart to Wise, is about how do you become a wise innovator. Because a smart innovator would think that every morning I'll come up to work because I want to push the boundaries of technology. And the way I do that is by cramming more features in my product. Right? If you look at smartphones these days, right, every 6 months there's a new release with more features crammed into it. But the wise innovator doesn't start with, what are the new capabilities I want to add in the product, but rather, how can I add more value to the customer, right? And what we find in emerging markets, which is being a great lesson for the West as well, is that more value doesn't mean more sophistication. You can add more value to people by reducing the complexity of your products.
Right.
And that is a big revelation, right? Because for a long time, progress in the West has been associated with adding stuff.
Right.
I need to get more stuff, right? I need to buy more stuff, right? I need to upgrade my system, right? So this is in a way like acting against what we call planned obsolescence. Right?
Yeah,
This is about how do you reuse things, how do you slow down the pace of, upgrading and replacements, right? By reducing the number of features. So rather than taking an additive approach, adding more stuff, you take a subtractive approach. You reduce features in your products, but you do that because you have the empathy for the customer needs.
Right.
And the customer feels like by reducing features, you make the product more accessible and more affordable, hence more valuable for them.
More valuable, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You've given us a lot to think about, and I think that one of my key takeaways here, before I conclude, is just that it's interesting to see this shift of emerging markets actually leading the way toward new thinking in Western markets for Western consumers.
Absolutely. I would simply say that I think you're right. Rather than talking about emerging markets versus developed economies, I think we should think about it as emerging businesses or emerging segments. In other words, in this country, United States, 50 million Americans lack health insurance.
Right.
60 million Americans are either unbanked or underbanked. Right.
Yep.
So what it means is that there are massive opportunities right here in these, United States.
Right.
Same thing in Europe, where the population is aging, the income level is dropping.
Yep.
So increasingly, my feeling is that there is more and more, the boundaries are blurring now between what we used to consider as emerging markets and the developed economies. Right? And so I think that rather than thinking about, I'm doing something in emerging markets and then I'm going to bring it here, I think we should, really look ourselves in the mirror and recognize that there are a lot of problems we need to be solving right here in this country, in healthcare, education, where a lot of people cannot afford bank financial services, education, healthcare. So I think that kind of frugal mindset is something we have to practice right here in this country, because there is a big market to go after right here.
Absolutely, and there's sort of a ubiquity to it.
Absolutely,
in that sense.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And that's the beauty of it. These are solutions that I call them almost like it will democratize in a way. There's a very democratic spirit in it, and almost a humanistic spirit in it, because you really care for your fellow citizens, and you're not innovating just for the people at the top of the pyramid, the high income earners in this country, but also for the middle class, because the middle class is also losing its purchasing power. Right, as I said earlier. In this country.
And you're also expanding your customer base.
Absolutely,
and share, which
absolutely.
is
And it's also a nice way, if you're an American
Yeah.
company, to ward off competition from emerging markets, right? Some of these companies from emerging markets are going to come soon to the West.
Right.
So it's a nice way to anticipate that and try to kind of get your hands, kind of learn the new skills ahead of time in preparation for this competition in the future.
Well, Navi, thank you very much for introducing us to the new world of frugal innovation. I look forward to hearing more from you on that, and I wish you much success with your new book.
Thank you so much, Mark.
It's been a pleasure to have you.
Likewise.
And that concludes this episode of Forward Focus. I'm Mark Dresner. Thanks for tuning in.